Welcome.
Welcome.
Today we're talking about a juicy topic
Yes.
of feelings.
Yes.
I feel like I should do a little gesture when I say the word feelings.
Yeah, it's not something that we typically talk about, but we're doing all the time. We're feeling.
It's so true.
But we need to talk about it.
Yeah.
And Rachel and I have actually put quite a bit of thinking and conversation into how we're going to structure and how we're going to talk about feelings, because they are so ubiquitous. And it's pretty challenging, but we're going to give it a go.
Yeah, because we're going to introduce some concepts and a new way of looking at feelings that is probably new and unlike any way that you've thought about feelings before.
Yeah.
So just to give us a little outline, first we're going to talk about two categories of feelings. We're going to differentiate two different kinds of feelings. One of them is normal, and one of them is healthy, or we could say normal is what is given to us or what's just common.
Natural, maybe.
Yeah. And then healthy is in what we are striving toward.
Mm-hmm. In our feeling life.
That's right. Then we'll talk about the path of actually working with our feelings and developing our feeling life, so we can actually work toward that healthy ideal.
Yes, and it's necessary. When you're on a path where you're trying to own your projections and heal and grow and really evolve as a human being on this earth, you're going to have to reckon with the feeling life. You're going to have to reckon with the shadow aspect of the feeling life, but also with the potential in you that can be grown and perfected in the feeling life. And we want to give you a picture of both of these aspects that you can take with you and really start to observe in your own feeling life what's going on. Welcome to Magenta FM, a show for people who aspire to deeper, richer, and more healthy ways of being in community, in leadership, and in relationship with others. I'm Louisa Barnum.
And I'm Rachel Hazlett-Carr. So let's get into it. Let's get into these two different types of feelings and how we define them and start to build a shared language.
Okay. It's going to sound abstract to start with, but just stay with us. So we're going to call two different categories of feelings. We're going to call one emotions and the other feelings. And this differentiation between these two words, at least in English, is never really clearly defined. We tend to just lump these two words in together. But here in Magenta, we're going to use them, especially in this podcast, in a different way. So emotions, another way of talking about emotions is to talk about them as non-cognitive kinds of feelings. And feelings are more what we are calling cognitive feelings.
We're not talking about cognitive as in the intellect.
Right.
So typically that word is used in like a, intellectual understanding of things. So when we say cognitive versus non-cognitive, we're talking about an understanding from the higher self.
Or just a sense of a sense of understanding, and you're cognizing. And that is not only done in your head, it's also done in your feeling life. It's like a complete package. So it doesn't just have to be an intellectual understanding. It can be an experiential understanding as well. So, recognition, that's another sort of form of that word cognition, where we recognize something.
Recognize.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so go ahead. Let's get into non-cognitive feelings.
When we talk about emotions, that's really a case in which emotions overwhelm us, right? Emotions come and go. We're always at the mercy of the storms of emotions. And they're essentially, what we mean by non-cognitive is emotions are not the way in which we get to know something. They are essentially, now this is a very important word or combination of words, they are essentially self-feeling. So when we are engaged in emotions, non-cognitive feelings, the same thing, what we're actually doing is self-feeling. We are feeling ourselves. They are usually about a recollection from the past experiences. They are usually an emotion like anger or jealousy or hate. They're usually negative. And they are, self-feeling is a kind of a state where you are stuck in a loop, a closed loop. So, for instance, self-pity. Self-pity is a really good example of a non-cognitive emotion where you're wallowing in the emotion. You are closed off from the world in your self-pity. It's not about anybody else. It's actually, I'm going to be really blunt, it's actually an egoic state.
Yeah.
Your ego is enclosed in a little shell, little capsule where all that you're aware of and all that you know or all that you are focused on is your own emotive state.
Yeah, and it's very familiar. Like
it's habitual.
Because we've been around it a lot.
Yeah.
So I could, share that I really, really easily identify the self-pity, self-feeling.
Yes.
And I've gotten much better at being able to notice, that I am, maybe I'm crying and
you're having a pity party.
I'm having a pity party
Yeah.
and I'm just like stuck in this feeling and I'm not actually like engaged or like thinking any new thoughts that I haven't thought before. It's just like on repeat
It's repetition.
cycle.
Yes. Yeah.
And because I've practiced, there is this part of me
You're really good at it.
that can say like, Rachel, this is self-healing.
Oh yeah, gotcha.
And this is not like you're just stuck here.
Yeah.
And something in that, and we'll get into this more further in the episode, just sort of gives a little shift, gives me a little bit of freedom around that. But just to stay into, in the self-feeling, it is just like, oh, this is so familiar. Yeah. Like I know this feeling. I know this grief, or I know this, this anger. Yeah. It's what we are accustomed to, we're familiar with.
We identify with it.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is, the thing about self-feeling is it's quite addictive. My teacher around this, who his name was Georg Kuhlewind, he is the only person that I've ever come across that has done this careful study and brings this idea of self-feeling. And other than one of his students, who was also my teacher, Dennis Klochek, he's the only other person I know on this planet. These two people who really understand this concept. So it's not well understood or well known, this addictive Now, when we say non-cognitive, what we really mean is you learn nothing by going back into this state. It's addictive because if you're having your pity party, I'm very familiar with pity parties myself. I can hold a grudge for days. I mean, I certainly could when I was a kid. There was a real hallmark of my tendency as a child. I really had to grow out of that, but I still can go there. Because it's a closed loop and you're in it, it's very, very difficult to get out of it. So that's one characteristic. You're addicted to self-feeling, to feeling yourself. Oh, I just have this grudge, and it's like you're wallowing in it. And so there's a kind of I know who I am. This is there's a righteousness about it, which is not as often understandable. Yeah. However, there's nowhere else to go. Yeah. It actually doesn't get you anywhere, and this is another hallmark of this non-cognitive, self-feeling, emotive state. there's no generation, there's no healing, there's no movement, there's no nothing, there's no perception to be had when you're in that state. It's closed.
Yeah. Let's give some more examples.
Okay.
Another one is more in relation. We more experience it in relationship, which is like a compulsive reaction. So when we're reacting with a feeling towards someone else,
Blame, for instance.
blame, anger, resentment, and it's just like the auto feeling,
autopilot,
and again, it's like, oh, this is what I know to be true. This is
I fully believe that you are to blame.
And of course, this is exactly what's happening. This is what always happens. And so it's that like familiar, that familiar feeling in relationship.
Know that when you're in that state that we're trying to describe, you're not free. So Georg Kuhlewind called them half-free energies, meaning there is the possibility that you can wake up, as you were saying earlier, but because they're addictive by nature, we compulsively go to these places that we're really comfortable going to, and they're so habitual and they're just built into us to react in a particular way to particular stimuli. Like, for instance, I'm going to react with blame. I'm going to get angry. And this also relates to the hereditary nature of why we go where we go when we're self-feeling. We learn it. So, for instance, anger is permissible. I go to anger because that was okay in my family. That's how we handled our emotions coming up. In response to things.
And so typically the feelings are, quote unquote, negative feelings.
Yes.
There is a case of narcissistic tendency where you can go into a feeling of like pride or righteousness or superiority or feelings that, are sometimes, used for good and beneficial. But in this case, it's like they're still in that stuck, closed loop.
They're still egoic.
Yes.
And so let's talk about oscillation too in relation to that. So we can oscillate between I'm so great, I'm special, I'm amazing. That often will oscillate into. I mean, I've had many clients describe this oscillation to me of actually I'm quite awesome into I'm nothing, I'm no one. And I think we all experience that while we're trying to find, well, where am I in this spectrum? While we're trying to, because that's the question, where am I? Where's the middle ground? Where's the truth? But the extreme end of that is bipolar depression, because we're trying to self-feel specifically our way toward the truth. But because because we are enclosed in this self-feeling tendency, we can't find it that way. There's only one way to find it, and we're going to get to that next, or soon, or later.
Okay, so a last point that we want to make in the context of relationships, is that you don't see or feel or acknowledge the other. You're so wrapped in your own emotions, your own non-cognitive feelings that you can't even connect to the other person who is with you or who you are, engaged with.
Yes, and what the result of this is projection. This is actually why we project, is because we are encapsulated in this egoic state of self-feeling, and we project that onto the other, and that's all that we can see. And the other person experiences this in a number of different ways, one of which is, gosh, this person just sucks the air out of the room. This is often what people experience with narcissism, the narcissistic style. The narcissist has to create a veneer of personality because their I is not strong enough to stand on its own. So they have this whole array of projections about who they think they are, and that's what they move. That they project that everywhere.
But there's no actual connection.
No, because the other person knows somewhere in them, either consciously or intuitively, that they're being projected upon, they're not being seen, they're not being heard. And this is a very real experience.
Yeah.
I just want to highlight that this is why we project. So when we've talked about projection in previous episodes, and therapists, and you can read about it. Projection is a very important concept to know. And we've said in other places, you have to own your own projection. Well, this is a part of the reason why and the cause of projection is the tendency to self-feel.
Okay, so next we're going to get into why do we do this?
Yeah.
But we're going to take a quick break, and then we will be back to talk about why do we self-feel.
Yes, okay.
Hello, thank you for watching or listening to today's episode of Magenta FM. We want to take a moment and tell you that we have a lot of useful resources for you on our website at magenta.fm.
And actually, we want you to know that we're now regularly holding and hosting webinars. And in those webinars, we dive into some really juicy and challenging topics. We don't just do a bunch of downloading. We actually do exercises. We bring tools. We journal right there and then, and we do plenary, and of course, lots of Q&A. So you can go to our website at magenta.fm. You can sign up for the next available webinar, and we're holding those on a regular basis. So we hope to see you there.
And lastly, one of the best ways that you can support our show is by sharing it with friends or family
please.
Who you think might find it helpful or interesting. So you can just pause the show right now, text your friend a link to magenta.fm/podcast, and there they can see all the episodes and listen to the most recent one or one that jumps out at them. And we really appreciate your support.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
All right.
Welcome back. Yes. So let's get into why do we self-feel, and talk a little bit more about just feelings in our day-to-day life.
Yeah, so normal feelings, let's call it normal, how we normally operate. And let me just say now that we all self-feel. This is what most of us do most of the time. Self-feeling is incredibly normal. Doesn't mean that it's healthy, but it is normal. The interesting thing about feelings is kind of like communication. We're doing it all the time, but we don't necessarily notice what we're doing because we're just in the flow of it, and we just do it habitually and normally. Yeah,
it's like a fish seeing water.
Yeah, exactly. And this is why we want to bring it to our attention, to everyone's attention, because it's time that we woke up to what's really going on in the feeling life.
Even just pausing and thinking that is like
just noticing,
has an impact. Just remembering. Oh yeah, I'm feeling all the time.
Yes. Yeah. The trouble. There's a lot of places, of course, where trouble comes in, but one of them is in suppression. So in our modern life, it's not okay to feel, except for when it's okay to feel. And I think this, music has a large role to play in giving us permission to feel something. So we, when I'm doing my typing or I'm doing something that I don't really particularly want to do, I'll turn on the music to create a mood so I can get it done and feel better about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we use mood music a lot to help us to feel better. Or we eat chocolate. Chocolate is like a mood enhancer. What is it for me anyway?
Yeah.
Suppression is a really big issue. And I know that I've come across a number of people who've said to me, look, I know that I don't know what I feel. Mm-hmm. I know that I am not connected to my feelings, but I don't know how to connect to my feelings.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting dilemma. And the consequence of suppression is depression. So depression is a really good picture or result of suppression of really strong emotions that we're not in touch with. So let me just say that being in touch with what we feel, and very much including emotions, non-cognitive emotions, is very important. So don't think that we're saying that non-cognitive emotions are bad. Yes, they are problematic, and we're trying to articulate the ways in which they're problematic, but suppression is much, much worse. Okay? It's really important that we're in touch. So what we actually feel on a day-to-day level is often, and maybe even usually, inherited from our family of origin or our culture of origin, like what's permissible to feel and what we don't talk about or we don't feel.
Right, especially what we can identify. We may be feeling a range of things, but we can only identify,
Like 4.
Yeah, like,
Yeah.
okay, I feel happy or I feel
Angry.
Angry.
Yeah.
Or I feel bored,
Or disappointed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever you grew up with, that's the thing that you'll easily identify with. And so
Yeah.
that's the one that you can spot,
Right.
in
Exactly.
yourself.
Exactly.
Even though there's a lot more happening.
So let's answer this question: why do we self-feel? Like, let's just have a go at trying to answer that question. That's a difficult question, and it's kind of challenging because what we're really touching into is like the evolution of consciousness, you could say. But it's also about the evolution or the evolution of our own individual paths of healing. Because a part of the issue in our time that we're dealing with is quite beside the worldview that we live in of materialism. We are learning who and what we are as human beings. This is what we're always doing at any time, right? In the history. And in our time, we are really wrestling with who we are as these individual I beings. I've talked about we're spiritual beings having a physical experience, but we're also beings of the I.
Meaning capital I.
Yes.
Not I as
the I am.
Yes.
I can say I am. I'm this unique being on this planet. There's no one like me. And this is not how things used to be. Like 2,000, 3,000 years ago, the consciousness of humanity was different. We are in this unique and privileged situation where we are these individuals, and a part of it's kind of like a teenager. They come out of the magic and the consciousness of childhood, which is very much at one with their parents and their family and their classmates and the world. There's this oneness. And this complete unself-consciousness of the child moves into the complete self-consciousness of the teenager who hardly knows what to do with themselves because they're so aware, overly aware of themselves moving through space and time, and they're just uber conscious of themselves and their surroundings, right? It's really challenging to be a teenager. And while we're obviously as adults not so painfully self-aware, yet we have to reckon with this emerging I. And the I has its shadow, which is the ego. So we have the ego. So the ego with a capital E is another word for I. We're not using this on the podcast because it's really confusing. So that's why we just say I. But small ego is the shadow side of the big ego, right? Yeah. And so what we have to do in our time is reckon with the small ego. And I would just like to propose that all the lack of empathy that we are seeing evidenced in the world, a lack of care and concern about the environment, wars, the unbelievable pollution that all those bombs, the unbelievable loss of life that's going on in Ukraine right now, all of those things are possible because of egoity. Mm-hmm. There's geopolitical games being played that I don't understand, but they have nothing to do with love or caring about anything other than their own power and gain, right? Ego. So we are, as humanity, we have to reckon with this tendency of closing off from the world and being self-involved. And we have to consciously take that in hand and grow out of it. And we're all on that path, every single one of us. I am too, very much so. So it's normal and it's okay.
Yeah.
We're not saying that you're bad because you're self-feeling. What we're saying is, here's a concept that's a tool that you can use now to observe this in yourself and say, gosh, look, I have a tendency to go into self-pity and have a little pity party, and maybe I actually don't need to do that because it's actually not helping me. I don't actually go anywhere. It's a dead end.
Yeah.
It's a checkmate.
Okay, so that's a good segue to our next topic, which is cognitive feelings. What is it that we are moving toward? What is it that we are aspiring toward?
It's actually quite hard to talk about. And this is why Rachel and I have had such a lot of conversation leading up to this episode, because we rarely have an experience of cognitive feeling. Most adults are moving through life in a self-feeling mode. Antipathy, sympathy. Is this good for me? Is this bad for me? We move through the world like that.
And sometimes it's the extreme form where we're just wallowing. And then, other times it's just very subtle. So not to say that we're all, constantly stuck. There's
being totally dysfunctional.
Degrees of, our emoting and emotions.
Yeah.
Okay. So cognitive feelings. So it's very hard to talk about these. But you had a good idea to start with just a couple pictures.
Yeah, pictures. Okay. Yeah. So we're going to start with pictures just to give you a sense of what we're going toward, and then we're going to give more concepts around it, because what we don't want is for it to get too abstract. So imagine that right now it's like we're recording this podcast in February in California, which means we get a nice early spring. And the flowers are starting to come up. So if you have the opportunity to look at flowers in the spring, I highly recommend it, because when you look at the flower and it's just starting to open and you just spend some time observing it, there's a mood that is present, sort of that can arise in you in response. I don't mean a sentimental mood or they're so pretty. But I mean a mood of growth, of forces of growth. It's like an archetype, an archetypal mood. It's the opposite of decay, which has its own mood, right? Like an autumn. So the mood of spring, of enlivening and growth and new beginnings, like Easter, the promise of Easter. This is a mood. And this is what we're talking about as a picture of cognitive feeling. Also, like climbing a mountain and getting to the top of a mountain and and being able to look at this vast landscape from this unique vantage point that sort of just takes your breath away. Yeah. And there's this like feeling of, might and vastness.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. So nature is full, absolutely full of pictures of cognitive feeling.
All right, let's talk about some examples in music.
Music is interesting because you can experience both the self-feeling tendency of our time. I find a lot of pop music is very self-feeling. It's really evoking a much more sort of primitive level of the feeling life, like the emotions and like, oh yeah, I want to feel like I want to lose myself in the music, in this, especially with that repetitive rhythm that doesn't change. It's very trance-like. I'm not saying it's bad. I like my Viking music when I'm doing things, but it's not cognitive feeling. So when you listen to music that was written from the Romantic era and earlier, so the sort of 1800s and earlier, early 1800s, 18th century and earlier, you will find music that still very much has that cognitive feeling. So Brahms, so this is Western, obviously this is Western classical music at the moment I'm talking about. Brahms, Mendelssohn, Mozart and Beethoven and Bach. I mean, Bach is so cosmic. He's describing these cosmic pictures of creation. So there's these vast vistas of mood and very, very complex feelings that are just so primeval and archetypal. So when you listen to Western classical music and these geniuses that really flourished through this particular medium of these instruments, you really can have an experience of what we're talking about. But also, there are music from other cultures like Indian ragas that were written, in this time period and earlier.
And all of these examples are feelings in which we are not closed off in an egoistic shell.
Yes, they are perceptive feelings.
We're connected.
They're cognitive, meaning they are getting to know, they're having a dialogue with the world. So when there's a cognitive feeling, let's talk about that in relation to relationships, because we're supposed to be talking about relationships. Let's use the word empathy.
Yeah.
Because that is an experience of what we're talking about. If we truly are in a state of empathy, then what we do is we forget ourselves and we are in the other. We are experiencing the world from their point of view. That is true empathy. That's a cognitive feeling. And the thing about it is that we are learning about things, about the world, about other people. We're not closed off. We're receptive. It's a creative state of being.
Right. And it doesn't mean that we don't have feelings. So this is where it gets a little tricky.
We're feeling
or it doesn't
deeply.
mean that every, quote unquote, negative feeling means that we are self-feeling. Although it's so easy to go into, for negative feelings to take us into habituated ways of being.
Exactly. It's so easy for us to fall into those habits.
Yes.
Yeah.
But there is a way that we can experience grief, for instance.
Yes.
Like you were sharing, was it in Iran?
Yeah. So I learned recently that in Iran, there is a perception around someone who's grieving for a loved one. They see that person as blessed, which I found to be a really beautiful picture, because when you are grieving, it's like the veil between yourself and the world of the dead or the spiritual worlds is thinner, and you're more open and receptive to having experiences like communication with your loved one, and there's so many stories that people have about having that experience of the veil being thinner, and I have my own stories as well. And
grief can easily slide into self-feeling. It can so easily slide into an addictive emotion. Yeah. A repetitive pattern that becomes non-cognitive. That's just oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed and I'm just stuck in this grief. Yeah.
Do you know the movie Truly, Madly, Deeply?
No.
Oh,
sorry.
It's okay. It's maybe our listeners remember it. It's kind of an old movie, but it's a picture of a woman who lost her lover, whom she loved very deeply, and she just couldn't get over her grief. It was constant, and she was really stuck there. And he finally came back from the dead to help her along, and eventually he was able to help move her along with the help of him and a couple of dead buddies. It's very cute, but it is a bit of a picture of being stuck in a sort of self-feeling way. So one characteristic, or I should say ambition, as we do the work of evolving out or transforming our tendencies toward addictive self-feeling into a more cognitive style of feeling, we're working to grow out of our tendency to project. That's the goal, because a cognitive feeling is not a projection. We're not overlaying someone with our feelings and our conclusions and our beliefs about them. We are receptive to who they are and what they're trying to convey to us, or what the world is actually speaking. Like nature, for instance, is constantly speaking, but are we receptive to what the world can teach us or show us?
Yeah.
And so the fundamental characteristic of cognitive feeling is, and I don't like to use this word because, well, you'll see why in just a second. The fundamental characteristic of a cognitive feeling is morality. And I don't like to use that word because obviously it evokes, Old Testament and, distant authorities telling us what we should or shouldn't do or feel or be. That's not what I mean. I mean morality in the sense of we are completely free. But when we are in a state of cognitive feeling, like we're empathic or we're grieving, it comes from a place of love. So there's this moral quality where we're no longer egoic.
Yeah.
We are interested in the other.
Mm-hmm. We're interested in the needs of all. We're interested in the truth and not just our truth.
Yes, exactly.
So let's talk about how this relates to our intuition.
Well, so intuition is something that we're constantly using. For instance, when we don't know any better, or when we have not really worked on understanding ourselves more, the self-knowledge piece, we tend to move through the world using our intuition as a antipathy-sympathy dialogue. Like very, very simple.
Like and dislike.
Yes. Do I like
Good
this
for
or do
me,
I not?
bad for me.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's it, right? That's not really intuition. That's just but that can be how we use it. Like I have the feeling that I'm not going to like this, or whatever, right?
Yeah. It's just more of an internal barometer for like and dislike.
Yeah,
but we call it intuition.
We do. We can call it.
True intuition is feeling into a truth, feeling into messages, the truth.
Yeah, this is the dialogue. The thing about a lot of intuition is that it's projection. So there's a lot of room for illusion or fantasy in our intuitive life. There's this really annoying saying is like someone's intuition is 100% correct 50% of the time, or some facetious way of putting it. Anyway, the point is, so long as you're projecting, you're not going to know if your intuition is accurate or not.
Yeah.
So you have to learn how to own the projection, which means owning what you feel and owning what you need so that you can take back the tendency to project and actually begin to get a feel for what the truth is. And why we said the is because it's not your truth. It's not a possible truth. It's the truth that's trying to be spoken to you through the world.
Yeah.
Like reality. That reality is multi-layered and complex. And so long as you're projecting, you're not going to really be in touch with reality.
Yeah.
So the goal is that you are in touch with reality. And the more that you are, the more accurate your intuition becomes. So the interesting thing about being an artist, for instance, you can use this capacity for cognitive feeling as you are hunting. You're on a hunt for what is trying to be said. So you have to not only know your medium, your creative medium really well, obviously. That's a part of why, part of mastery as an artist, but you're fine-tuning your feeling life as an intuitive capacity so that you can intuit the idea with a capital I that is trying to be expressed. So as a musician, you're tuning into to the idea that the composer is trying to express. And the degree to which your cognitive feeling is refined is the degree to which you're going to be capable of grokking, cognizing that idea.
Yeah. Well, that's a really great segue to what I wanted to speak about next, actually, because if we think about artists and the way that Joseph Beuys did, we should all be artists, that everyone needs to be an artist.
Yes, I agree.
Contributing to the artwork of our social organism.
Yes, co-creating together.
Yes, the world.
Yep.
I've been thinking about this a lot because I'm reading Rick Rubin's book that just came out called The Creative Act.
Do you like it?
I do like it. Yeah. And it's all geared toward artists. And as I read this, I keep thinking, but we are all supposed to be artists.
Right.
So this is really for everybody.
Wow. Awesome.
Anyway, so we're thinking about creating the social organism, creating our society together, and every one of us contributing. Mm-hmm. We need this cognitive feeling to deal with the challenging issues of our time. And so let's talk about, issues of social justice or issues of society needing to find our way. Yeah. And how do cognitive feelings and self-feeling come into play?
Yes, that's a really good question. So when I was working as a consultant on some projects that are, multi-stakeholder projects trying to solve tough social problems, when I was in that world, what I noticed, and it's not hard to find, like the emails that I get from these social justice and other kinds of justice organizations, nonprofits, there is a lot of tendency toward black and white thinking. Yeah. Black and white feeling, really, maybe we'll call it, of us against them. And we're the people who are right and they're wrong. And they're the bad guys and we're the good guys. And this is not helped by Hollywood, obviously. And the challenge that the consultants in this space often have, if they're experienced, is that they have to help people see the other points of view. Yeah. And to get out of this space of believing that they have the answers. Yeah. And to actually be more open, like to put a crowbar in there and get people more open to diversity of experiences and opinions. Yeah. Which is the whole point of a multi-stakeholder dialogue, right? Yeah. And this is very challenging because we want to be right. Yeah. And we don't actually want, if we have not done this introspection and this self-knowledge work, we only understand projection because we are going to project if we don't know ourselves. Right. That's why on the door of every single esoteric path, there is 2 words. It doesn't matter where in the world. It's like, know thyself. This is the key. So if you aren't prepared to do your inner work, but you want to change the world, all you can achieve is more of the same. Yeah. And we saw this over and over again. There is a place for feelings. Mm-hmm. There is a place for, like, if you have, righteous anger coming up inside of yourself, there is a way that you can hold that and you can identify what of this is my wound, what of this is my stuck place and my wound and my shadow, and what of this is actually an empathy and a care for the whole, or a concern for the children of our future, or whatever the issue at hand is. Yeah. And if you differentiate those and you pull your own stuff out of it, then that righteous anger can
I think usually it gets transformed into honesty and curiosity and using your voice, but also listening. You know, there's this whole productive and generative gesture that can rise out of that.
Right.
As opposed to a righteous anger where you're just yelling in somebody's face about how you're right and they're wrong.
Yeah.
So I want to bring this up because I don't want to, because there are times where we feel, you know, grief for the world, or we feel sadness, or we feel angry about, you know, what's happening in the world. And we want to be very clear that we are not at all saying that you
shouldn't feel that way.
Yeah. And that we should just, check out from those feelings.
Right.
Or, we have to face the work that we're here to do in the world.
And we have
starting
to feel
with ourselves.
Yeah. And we have to feel what we feel.
Yeah.
And we're going to get to that very soon. But yes, and I think, you know, make it productive. And I don't mean in a kind of, productive, okay, I'm going to get out there and kick some ass kind of way. Or maybe that might be good.
Yeah.
But I mean in a...
useful.
Yes.
Yeah.
For ourselves in understanding what our motives are.
Yeah.
It's very important that we're in touch with the truth of our motives.
Yeah.
Is it an egoic motive? Like I want to feel good about myself and I want to, you know, be a fancy consultant, or I want to, like, you know, do some good in the world so I can feel good about myself, right?
Yeah.
Or is our motive because we feel grief and anger and we wish to serve with love?
Yeah.
We wish to serve.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so let's take this to, you know, what are the steps that we take? What is the path that we take to help grow ourselves toward cognitive feeling and grow out of our natural tendencies toward self-feeling?
Yeah. So let's just give a little context. The thing about healing and transformation and regeneration is we're going from one state to another. But there is so those are sort of two states, right? But there's a third aspect to this, which is the intervention of the I. And I mention this because we need to grow out of the tendency toward polarity, of which antipathy and sympathy is one example. Or another example is the polarity of, as we've just been talking about, self-feeling versus cognitive feeling. And realize that actually it's always a trinity. There's always a third aspect that is that is us. If we so choose, and we're always free to make that choice. The part of us that is always present, and the muscle of that is the witnessing all of that without judgment and without conclusions, but is there as the great healer.
I know for myself, it can look like noticing, you know, that I'm in a self-feeling, and I can say, oh, I'm stuck. That's something that I'll say to my husband sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, it's my way of like owning, like,
Right.
oh, I realize that I am stuck in resentment right now, or I am stuck in this. And, you know, that witness sort of pulls me out, and it's not a, you know, blame or shame, but I can be pulled out and start to sort out, you know, what's productive, what's generative, what's I can pull myself out of this, you know, self-enclosed, you know, small lowercase ego,
Yeah.
and
Right.
And start to see something greater.
Right. Yeah.
So the I.
So what you just said reminds me of something that I touched on earlier, which is what we're really doing is purifying our feeling life. We're refining it, we're purifying it, we're transforming it. This is the work.
Yeah.
We're doing this in our thinking life, we're doing this in our feeling life, and this will also impact our will. That's a little bit of anatomy that we've touched on in previous episodes, so I'm not going to go into that, but this purification is also what we mean by owning the projection, just like what you were saying.
Yeah.
It is a purification process where we're cleaning the lens. Let's take a break.
Would you like a serious solution to your people problems? One that is deep and lasting? Would you like to be able to raise the quality of interactions you have with the people in your life and work? Most people believe that the solution to ongoing people problems, such as conflict and misunderstanding, is memorizing the right thing to say or some other clever tactic. However, there are always situations where such tactics simply won't apply or succeed. Instead, you need something that can help you be present and generative in every interaction, every moment, no matter how unexpected or difficult or how high the stakes are. The truth is, you can shape the interactions you have merely through the quality of your presence. Unfortunately, an authentic and elevated quality of presence doesn't come easily or naturally any more than playing the violin does, because it's a trained and honed way of being. Like a master of Tai Chi, you can learn to work with the social spaces between you and others, not with manipulation, nor with dominance or force, but with a greater freedom, greater understanding and generosity, and a stronger presence of mind. Imagine having the kind of presence that commands respect, not because you're the alpha, but because others rise to meet you there. Imagine attracting in your life and work the kinds of high-functioning relationships that you long for. Magenta Academy for the Social Arts has developed a path to help you grow an elevated presence. Join the Elevated Presence Masterclass, where you will begin building a foundation for transforming your relationships. Enrollment opens soon, don't miss out. Go to magenta.fm/elevated presence to get on the waitlist.
So the path that we're going to lay out today and talk about today consists of fluency, noticing, and turning the soul.
Yeah.
So let's talk about fluency. Fluency of a vocabulary, of a understanding and familiarity with the feeling life.
Yeah. And there are a lot of feeling words. So one thing we should have in the show notes is a link to a list of feeling words so that you can see for yourself just how many there are, at least in English. And the link to that is going to be magenta.fm/feelings.
Great.
Okay, so go to that link and you can see. We took it straight out of Nonviolent Communication from Marshall Rosenberg. Took that list. Okay, so feelings is kind of like a language. It's certainly a language for the world of nature and animals. That's how they communicate. But it's also a language that we could really do to get to know better. So, for instance, if Rachel and I are having a dialogue, because we know each other so well, if she says, "How are you, Louisa?" I'm not going to say, "I'm good." Well, I might, but she knows that that's not what's really going on underneath the surface. So we can have more of a dialogue about what's really, and we can get much more nuanced. So if you actually were to sit down and think back to a time when you got really upset about something, and you thought about what did you actually feel, and you went through that list of feeling words and just underlined every word that resonated for you, you might find 10 different feelings that were going on. So this is what we mean by becoming more fluent, that you're actually more in touch with what you really feel and the amount and the difference in the different kinds of feelings that are really playing out in you. This is good. It's good self-knowledge. This is a good starting point.
Yeah. And so that really ties into noticing when the feelings are self-feeling or addictive or they're non-cognitive emotions.
Yeah, and they're usually negative in that case. And so it's not about judging, because again, we all do it. We're all doing it all the time. It's not about saying, oh, Rachel and Louisa are telling me that I shouldn't be self-feeling. You know, we're all doing it. It's okay to self-feel. The problem is if we're not aware of it. That's the problem, because that way we have no choice but to continue to repeat that pattern. And we need to learn how to get out of that, so that we can participate more with more presence and a more nuanced presence of mind.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
Okay, so the big step here is turning the soul.
Yeah.
I love that expression.
This is definitely another step. It's not the first step, and it may not even be the second step, right? It's what you can do. So let's say you are becoming more fluent with thinking about the feeling life, and you're starting to notice just how many feelings you're actually having and what they actually are, and you're getting in touch with your truth about what's really going on under the surface. You're finding that by doing that work, you're becoming aware of how dysregulated you can become, right? So that's really good information. You're starting to notice where you get really habituated and stuck, like self-pity, for instance. That's been my place. Some people, it's anger. That's when you start to actually have a choice about whether you're going to continue down that road of self-pity and blame and pity party, or whether you're going to say, you know what, I'm not going to go there. And you start to build an ability or a capacity or a strength of spirit where you're like, I'm just not going to go to the place of pity party anymore. I'm going to pull my socks up and I'm going to take responsibility for what happened. And I'm going to say, I had a role to play in this situation, and it's up to me to change things.
Yeah.
Or something. I'm just like using a picture. So turning of the soul is turning away from the place where you want to go, the addictive pull of self-pity, for example, and the closed loop of that, the dead end that represents, and choose to go to somewhere else in your soul instead. It's not easy to do, because at first these are deeply ingrained habits, and we are in love with our wounds. as my teacher Dennis used to say, we are so in love with our wounds. We want to be wounded. We want to, because we are used to that, and we feel some comfort in that because we know who we are when we're in that state. Yeah. And when we're not wounded, we don't know who we are anymore. And that's very scary. It's very scary because the ground is shifting under our feet in that case. So the turning of the soul takes courage.
It does. Oh, it takes so much courage and strength.
Yeah. And we don't always manage it.
That's right.
Yeah.
But when we do, it's really liberating. Profound and liberating.
Yes.
We can start by managing it, after the fact, and taking responsibility for
after the fact.
The feelings that we had after the fact. Over time, that works, can work toward noticing when you're dwelling in resentment or dwelling in some feeling and shifting it right then. But there's a lot of strength needed to do
practice,
that.
And practice, honestly.
Yeah.
We've been at it for years working on this turning of the soul. I mean, I learned about this concept 20 years ago and I'm still working on it.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that it's so difficult that it's impossible. I don't mean to imply that either. Like, anyone can do this.
Yes.
It's just that it's really helpful to have a good setup.
Yeah.
And that's why being in tune with your feeling life, just know that being in tune with your feeling life is just one step on this path. Feelings are ephemeral. They come and they go. They're just symptoms. They are not the causes. Mm-hmm. They arise out of a deeper setup. And we've covered this in previous episodes. One of those deeper layers is needs, and specifically unmet needs. So feelings and getting in touch with your feeling life is really important on the path of healing, because they are clues to clue you into, you have to excavate here if you have a lot of self-feeling going on, like pity parties, you need to know that there's some needs that are not getting met. And what are they? And you need to start working on getting those met.
Yeah. In a way that is free.
And don't be so disempowered.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So maybe we will just mention self-mastery.
Yeah.
So self-mastery in the realm of feelings is not about control. You just can't be in control, not when it comes to feelings. What you can do is refine. Mm-hmm. You can refine and you can elevate to the point where your feeling life can become an organ of perception. So this is what we mean by intuition as well.
Yeah.
You can feel your way forward through a lot of uncertainty and unknown, but make the right steps. You can make the right decisions because you're listening instead of projecting.
And we can cultivate certain feelings and grow our capacity for feeling certain feelings that may fall out of our, habitual tendencies, like gratitude, for instance. And you can, have a practice of seeing your partner in the light of gratitude. And more, that can become your habituated way of seeing
the world. Imagine.
Instead of whatever you inherited from, your family or your culture of origin.
Especially around relationships.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that has a lot of implications.
Yes, it does. And in fact, in meditation, Western esoteric methods of meditation, the feeling life is a very important part of the training. The process of refining and turning your feeling life into an organ of perception has huge implications for your evolution.
Yeah. And we should just plug, we did not plan this, but it really works out. It's just perfect at the end of the episode. This is what we teach in the Elevated Presence Masterclass. This is part of the daily practice that we teach, is the cultivation of feelings of gratitude, peace, and reverence.
Yes. And these three feelings are the foundation upon which you can build a practice of personal development.
Yeah.
But these three are very foundational, these specific three feelings. And
peace, gratitude, and
reverence. Yes, and we don't have time to get into it today,
we don't.
But we do get into it in quite a lot of detail in the Elevated Presence Masterclass.
Yes. So to recap what we went over today, we covered a lot. 2 different categories of feelings, non-cognitive feelings and cognitive feelings. We started with the non-cognitive feelings, which we also called emotions. And that's just sort of our internal language, how we use, emotions or emoting, and also self-feeling. We use our feeling, what we're feeling to sort of like feel ourselves in the world.
And that it's an egoic state.
Yes. And we're closed off.
Yeah.
Those are some basics.
And one more thing, it's a source of projection.
Yes. We talked a little bit about suppression. Most people don't have tools for working with their feeling life. So suppression is, the typical...
The coping mechanism.
Which is worse than self-feeling or emoting.
Right. Yes.
Okay, and then we talked about cognitive feelings, and we tried to start to share a picture with you around what is this concept of cognitive feelings. And there's some experiences that you can go and have or remember, in nature or listening to pieces of music.
Well, anything that is after 1850 could be pretty, is probably going to be really moving into the self-feeling realm.
Because that's what we're working with. That's what we're working
exactly.
through
That's where we're at. And we need to reckon with this.
Yes.
And it's all good. It's all part of what we're doing.
Yeah. Okay. And then we talked about the role of the I, which is also the higher self. I, capital I. And the I being kind of in a trinity between antipathy and sympathy. We can rise above. If you picture a triangle of, like and dislike.
Yeah, it's the mediator. It's the middle path between the thesis and the antithesis.
Yeah.
It's a synthesis.
And then we laid out a bit of a path.
Yeah, path of development, how to work with this.
Yeah. Fluency, getting to know more names and language for feelings, and getting into a practice of identifying more feelings.
Yeah, what you're actually feeling.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe the 4 that you're comfortable or used to identifying.
Getting beyond those.
Yes.
Yeah.
Noticing those, and then the practice of turning the soul away from the habituated autopilot, stuckness, self-feeling toward cognitive feeling.
Yeah, like going from glass half empty to glass half full. Stop looking at the world as if it's glass half empty about everything.
Yeah.
And start thinking about, like the practice of gratitude, for instance, being grateful instead of resentful.
And then we just touched on this idea of self-mastery.
The goal is not to try and control or manage, because all you end up by doing is suppressing and denying. The goal here is mastery. And what mastery is really about is elevation, evolving, getting to know the nature of your medium really, really well, which is why we say fluency is so important. Just imagine that your feeling life is actually a creative medium that you can become masterful with. But no master in any discipline believes that they are controlling. Like with singing, for instance, the more you try to control, the worse it gets. You actually have to, it's like walking on a tightrope. You have to let go. It's this radical letting go that allows you to step outside of the bounds of your ego, because the ego wants to control. That's what's happening, right? To let go of the idea that you can control your feeling life, and to instead focus on what you want to cultivate. Just look at the difference between a piece of art by Rembrandt and a piece of art by Francis Bacon. What are you cultivating?
Yeah.
Are you cultivating an incredible connection to spiritual realities that are able to be made manifest with paint? There's no way he controlled that process, but he is a master. Or are you cultivating fear and destruction and horror as your muse?
Right. Okay, well, on that note, thank you so much for listening.
You. Yeah.
And as we said in the break, the best way that you can support our show is by sharing it with someone who you think might find it interesting or useful.
Yeah.
And also check out our website, magenta.fm, and see what we have going on there. We have upcoming webinars.
On a regular
courses.
basis. Yep.
Yes. And we would love to have an opportunity to engage with you, answer questions,
and
really
hear from you.
Yeah, and dive into these work and concepts, together.
Because they're challenging. You're not hearing about them anywhere else. I've never heard of anyone talking about this anywhere else. So we want to hear from you. What is it? What came up for you? What was really challenging? What was very abstract? Tell us.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you.